Imagine a man whose entire world is darkness. No colors, no faces, no sunrise, just the cold, endless black of darkness. This is Bartimaeus. Every day, he sits by the road in Jericho, listening to the sounds of life passing him by, forgotten, ignored, unseen. But today, yes, today is different. The air is thick with anticipation. There is a name on everyone's lip, a name that brings hope, healing, and miracle. Jesus of Nazareth. Bartimaeus has heard the stories. The blind receive their sight, the crippled walk, the dead live again. And now Jesus is walking his way. This is Bartimaeus' only chance. His one moment to break free from the shadows. But will his voice be heard among the crowd? Before we dive into this extraordinary encounter, an encounter that will forever change Bartimaeus' life, let's take a brief pause for 5 seconds. In this video, we'll witness the power of a desperate cry, the unstoppable light of a miracle. Be right back. The sun was a merciless orb hanging in the sky, drenching the land in its harsh glare. The road from Jericho to Jerusalem was a lifeline for traders, travelers, and pilgrims. A stretch of beaten earth, winding through the arid landscape. On any given day, it was a bustling thoroughfare, but today it seems more alive than ever. The air was filled with a sense of anticipation, a buzz that was almost palpable. People were talking, gesturing, their voices rising in excitement as they thronged the road, converging from every direction. They had heard the news. Jesus of Nazareth was passing through. The stories of his miracles, his teachings, his very presence had spread like wildfire. The healer, the prophet, the man who spoke with authority, who performed wonders that defied comprehension, he was here in Jericho walking these very streets. But while the city was electrified with expectation, there was one soul seated by the roadside for whom this moment meant everything. His name was Bartimaeus, a blind beggar. He was a fixture in this road, a part of the landscape like the dust and the stones. Each day was a monotonous cycle of darkness, an endless stretch of time broken only by the sounds and sensations that filled his world. He couldn't see the faces of those who passed by, couldn't know their expressions, whether of pity, disdain, or indifference. He felt them in the shuffle of feet, in the coins dropped into his outstretched hands, in the murmurs of conversation that floated above him like distant echoes. He had not always been blind. There were memories, hazy now, like dreams half remembered. He recalled the vibrant colors of his childhood, the blue of the sky, the green of the field, the gentle, loving face of his mother. But those images had long since faded, swallowed by the creeping darkness that had stolen his sight, his livelihood, his dignity. Bartimaeus had learned to navigate his world by sound and touch. His other senses sharpened to compensate for the loss of vision. He knew the feel of the rough stones underfoot, the warmth of the sun on his face, the smell of spices from the marketplace, the cadence of noise passing by. He had even learned to distinguish the supple shifts in people's gaits, the hurried steps of a merchant late for market, the confident stride of a soldier, the hesitant shuffle of a child. His blindness was his prison, but it was a prison he had come to know intimately. Today, though, something was different. He could feel it in the air, in the rising hum of excitement, the buzz that swept through the crowd like a wave, his strength to catch the words of those around him, piecing together fragments of conversation. Jesus was coming, the healer, the miracle worker, the one they called the Son of David. Bartimaeus' heart quickened. The story he had heard, whispered from one beggar to another, had seemed too wondrous to be true. A man who made the lame walk, who cleansed the lepers with a touch, who even raised the dead. How could such things be possible? And yet here he was in Jericho, on this very road where Bartimaeus laid. A flicker of hope kindled in Bartimaeus' heart. He listened, his ears trailing, his heart pounding. The crowd was swelling, the voices growing louder, nearer. He could sense the movements around him, the bodies pressing close, jostling, a sea of humanity surging like a great living tide. And then, above the din, he had it. A name spoken with awe, with reverence. Jesus. The name sent a joy through him. This was his chance, his only chance. If even half of what he'd had was true, then this man could change everything. But would he notice a blind beggar, a forgotten man, discarded by society? Would he care? Desperation surged within Bartimaeus, a tidal wave of longing and fear. He had to try, he had to make himself heard. With a voice that trembled but was filled with raw, unbridled emotion, he shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." The words stormed from his throat, a cry that echoed his deepest yearning, his most fervent prayer. It was a plea that came not just from his lips, but from the very depths of his soul, a cry for mercy, for healing, for a chance to live again. The crowd's reaction was swift and brutal. "Be quiet," they snapped. "Shut up, beggar. Don't bother the master." Their words were like stones hurled at him, each one a blow to his spirit. He felt hands pushing him back, shoving him away, trying to silence him, to force him back into the shadows where they thought he belonged. But Bartimaeus would not be silenced. This was his moment, his one shot at freedom, at life. He has spent years in darkness, years being ignored, being silenced, being told he was worthless. But today, not now. With every ounce of strength in his body, he shouted again, louder, more desperate, "Son of David, have mercy on me." His voice rang out, a cry of defiance, a declaration that would not be ignored, would not be denied. He could not see the faces turning towards him, could not see the annoyance, the pity, the confusion. He did not care. His entire being was focused on one thing, one hope, that Jesus would hear him, that he would stop, that he would see him. The world around him seemed to recede, to blur into insignificance. It was just him and his cry, and the faint, fragile thread of hope that Jesus would answer. And then, amidst the chaos, something extraordinary happened. The crowd, which had been a roiling, surging mass, suddenly stilled. A hush fell, a silence so profound it was as if the very earth had stopped breathing. Bartimaeus felt it, sensed the change, the sudden stillness that hung heavy in the air. His heart pounded in his chest, a wide, frantic beat that seemed to echo in the quiet. And then he heard it. A voice clear and strong, filled with a quiet authority that seemed to resonate in the very core of his being. Call him here. It was Jesus calling. Bartimaeus' breath caught in his throat. Could it be? Was he really speaking about him? To him? The thought was almost too much to comprehend. This was the man who healed lepers, who made the lame walk, who commanded the wind and waves, and he was calling for him. He felt hands on his arms, lifting him to his feet. The sudden movement was disorienting. He stumbled, his legs weak and trembling. The crowd around him seemed to part, and he was guided forward, step by step, his heart pounding, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Each step felt like a lifetime, each breath a prayer. Was this really happening? Was he truly brought before the one who could change everything? Take courage, someone said, their voice warm, filled with unexpected kindness. Get up, he's calling for you. Bartimaeus' heart was in his throat. His hands shook as he threw off his cloak, the threadbare garment that was his only possession, his only shelter against the world, his brand and his only trademark. It fell to the ground, forgotten as he moved forward, guided by unseen hands. He stumbled, his feet unsure, the ground beneath him shifting, rough and uneven, but he did not care. Nothing mattered except reaching him, except standing in the presence of the one who could make him whole. And then he was there. He could feel it, the warmth, the presence that seemed to envelop him like a blanket, a sense of peace, of power, of something holy. He stood trembling, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He was blind, but in that moment he felt seen. Truly seen for the first time in his life. The silence was thick, heavy with anticipation, with something unspoken, something sacred. And then that voice spoke again, gentle and yet filled with an authority that seemed to reach deep into Bartimaeus' very soul. What do you want me to do for you? The question hung in the air, echoing in the stillness. What do you want me to do for you? Bartimaeus' mind whirled, his thoughts racing. What did he want? What had he always wanted? More than anything, more than breath, more than life itself. The answer was there, raw and aching. A need that had defined his existence, a longing that had been his constant companion in the darkness. Rabbi, he said, his voice breaking with emotion, I want to see. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of his entire life, the pain, the longing, the desperate hope. I want to see. It was not just a plea to regain his physical sight. It was a cry from the depths of his soul, a plea to be made whole, to be restored, to be given back the life that had been stolen from him. There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence, and then Jesus spoke. Go, he said, his voice gentle, filled with compassion. Your faith has healed you. The words washed over Bartimaeus like a wave, a rush of warmth, of light. For a moment he stood there, suspended between fear and hope, between darkness and the promise of something unimaginable. Then slowly, cautiously, he opened his eyes. At first, there was only a blinding whiteness, a searing brightness that seemed to fill his entire being. He blinked, his eyes watering, his heart hammering in his chest. And then gradually the world began to take shape. Colors, shapes, movements. It was overwhelming. A torrent of sensation that flooded his senses. The sky above was a vast expanse of bright blue, brilliant blue. The sun a radiant orb that made him squint and turn his head. He could see the rough, weathered stones of the road. The swirl of dust stirred up by the crowd. He could see faces, hundreds of them, staring at him in astonishment, mouths open, eyes wide. He could see. Bartimaeus gasped, his breath catching in his throat. Tears blurred his vision, and he wiped them away, almost laughing at the sensation of wetness on his cheek. He looked down at his hands, marveling at the sight of his own fingers, at the play of light and shadows on his skin. It was all so vivid, so real. He felt like he was seeing for the first time, like a newborn discovering the world. And then he looked at the man standing before him, the one whose voice had called him, whose words has healed him, Jesus. His eyes met those of the man from Nazareth. In that moment, everything else faded away. The world, the crowd, the noise, it all disappeared. There was only him standing there, looking at him with a gaze that was at once piercing and gentle, filled with love and understanding, with a kindness that seemed to see into the very depths of his soul. For a long moment they stood there, locked in that gaze, Bartimaeus' heart overflowing with gratitude, with awe, with something that he could not put into words. He wanted to speak, to thank him, to fall at his feet and weep with joy, but the words will not come. His throat was tight, his chest constricted with emotion. Jesus smiled, a smile that seemed to light up his full face, that filled Bartimaeus with a warmth that drove away the last vestiges of darkness and fear. And then he turned slowly and began to walk away, moving through the crowd with a grace and purpose that left those around him in silent awe. Bartimaeus stood there watching him go, his heart still pounding, his mind reeling. The people around him were murmuring, pointing, some reaching out to touch him, as if by touching him they might share in the miracle they had just witnessed. He barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on Jesus, on the man who had given him his sight, who had changed his life in an instant. He took a step forward and then another. His movements were hesitant, unsteady, like those of a child learning to walk. He stumbled, his legs weak, his body trembling with the sheer intensity of what he was feeling. But he kept moving, kept following, his eyes never leaving the figure of Jesus as he moved down the road, surrounded by the crowd that seemed to part before him like the Red Sea. Bartimaeus followed, his heart filled with a joy so intense it was almost painful. He could see. Every step he took was a miracle. Every breath a testament to the grace and power of the one who had healed him. He felt as if he were walking on air, as if the very ground beneath his feet had become light and insubstantial. He was free from the darkness, free from the pain and despair that had been his constant companion for so long. And as he spoke, as he shared his story with passion and joy, with tears and laughter, with every fiber of his being, he knew that he was a part of something greater, something that would echo through the ages, something that would bring light to the darkest corners of the world. For he had been blind, and now he could see. And that light, the light of Christ, would never be extinguished. Remember, no matter where you are or what you are going through, miracles still happen. They are not bound by time, logic, or circumstance. They are as close as the air we breathe, waiting for the right moment to unfold. Share this video with your friends, leave thoughts in the comment, and let's keep the conversation going. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Till I come your way next Sunday, I'm your Wonder Tribesman, Prosper Nwachukwu, bringing you the mysteries of love.